Today, I spend a full hour with a man who understands the power of liberty better than most, and he's taking action now and changing things, Mr. Ron Paul. How are you, Doctor?
Nice to see you.
Good to see you.
Good.
I'm not going to call you Congressman because I have a hard time people retaining their title of public service after
That's right.
they're
First
gone.
name basis.
First name. I'll call you Doctor because you're still a doctor.
Well, you know, when they asked me that in Washington, they said, "You want to be called Dr. Congressman?" I said, "Well, doctors are still more popular than politicians."
Not for long, not with what's going on.
Oh, no, that's right.
I wanted to, we wanted to get you on because I homeschool, and we have several people on our staff that homeschool.
Right.
And I think it's like the university system. We will never fix our country if we are all put in the same box. We are not thinking creatively anymore. We're not thinking differently anymore. We're taught, stay in this box from cradle to grave.
And just think of the advancement of this notion that we should have a core curriculum to really make the big box and force it on everybody.
I know.
Instead of teaching or allowing kids to learn on their own and what they want to learn at the pace they want to do it, and have it self-directed, have parents in charge, not the state. I mean, that's where the real problem is.
We highlight books of guests, and I don't think I've ever seen one highlighted with that many highlights. I've never seen anybody, any book that has come back to me, Glenn, you got to talk to him about these things, with that many highlights in it. The name of the book is The School Revolution. And how are we going to, first give me the premise, and then how we get there.
Well, we have a broken system.
Yeah.
And we have to offer them something else. Now, homeschooling's been around for a while. In the 80s, we had to fight real hard to make sure they didn't close down all homeschooling, and that fight occurred in Texas. But most people now, and it's not just conservative, there's people from the other side of the spectrum who realize that the system isn't working. Every single day you see the violence in school, and kids getting out of school, and they go to college and they have to be taught how to write again and spell again. They have to learn their English. So the system is very much broken. And I go over that on the history, but also I want to have a curriculum that talks about the freedom philosophy and people thinking along these terms, and have a different perspective on history, which you're very interested in, different perspective in history and economics, obviously, but also to change the atmosphere with the idea of getting young people prepared to either go to college or start their own business. And the easiest job is convincing people there's something seriously wrong with the system.
That's easy.
But unfortunately, in Washington, economics, things go bad, spend more money, print more money. And that's the way it is in education, too. They want to just spend more money on it.
The problem is, though, and I know this as a homeschooling dad, my wife feels the same way, it's terrifying because this whole society has taught you don't have a certificate. You're not smart enough. You can't do that. Let professionals. If I hear that one more time, let the professionals do it. Give me a break, man. Look what you've churned out. The system is churning out a bunch of people that cannot survive.
And homeschooling isn't like if I were required to homeschool. I happen not to have homeschooled, but let's say I was to homeschool in this day and age, and I've been through the sciences and medicine, but if I had to sit down and explain physics at this moment, I'd have to work at it. It isn't like the parent has to know every single thing. I mean, the instance that we have in the curriculum, we want people to be helped on the internet. That's what's so great about the internet. And there'll be lectures on the internet, and there'll be communication among the students on the internet. They'll be self-taught at their own pace with parental help. There's more guidance in the first 6 years. because they're not, they need more guidance. But later on, you've had the experience, and obviously you allowed your kids to make a little bit of decision on their own.
Yeah.
They
go at
like
their own
this,
pace.
this instead of everybody does this and march them in and sit down. And some people describe it as prison. I thought, holy man, that's pretty much true. Walk in and sit in this chair and don't move.
Right. And go at everybody else's pace and learn at the average way. When we're boxing everybody in. Let me show something, and this is one of the reasons why I saw this interview with you on MSNBC, and I immediately, before the interview was over, I said, book Ron Paul for two reasons. One, because I want to talk to you about homeschooling, but two, how do you conquer this? Look at what they did to you on MSNBC.
We've been taught that the Federal Reserve is sacred, except for the last 5 years, people are questioning the Federal Reserve. We have been taught that deficits are good and spending is good and borrowing is no problem. But we have to reverse that, and we have to.
What's the correlation between homeschooling and getting a better understanding of the Fed? I mean, that's
the whole thing
for me.
My whole curriculum and everything I talk about is based on the freedom philosophy, which is what I've been talking about for 30 years.
If you want to get to 20% of children being homeschooled, that's going to mean a vast drop in the number of women in the workforce, because it is largely women who are doing the homeschooling. A lot of women can't afford to give up their jobs to homeschool their children. A lot of families can't afford that. And do we actually want to be encouraging women not to take part in the workforce, because we know how valuable that diversity is?
That is the most outrageous thing I've ever heard.
I'm anti-woman now.
Yeah, you're anti-women, and somehow or another that a woman's job is more important than her children, or a man's job is more important than their children's education. I was flabbergasted.
That was her assumption, but she didn't even leave any wiggle room for just saying, well, maybe you can work this out. Maybe you can do part-time.
Right.
Maybe you can get somebody to help you.
What I shouted was, he was talking about 25%. You were asking for 25%.
Right.
Not 100%. 25%. There's not 25% of American women that would say, you know what? For the preservation of freedom, for the best chance for my children to even survive, forget about the country, for my best chance of my children to survive, I'm going to take this on. I think that's important. No?
But don't interfere with my career. Huh?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, well.
Okay, so we have Common Core coming into the schools now, and tracking our kids. I mean, I know you're called a conspiracy theorist if you say this. I don't know how you did it for so long, but conspiracy theorist if you claim this is happening. But it is true. It's happening. Google is involved. Yahoo's involved. Microsoft is a big supporter of this, and they talk about the parents and the children now as customers. If this was done by the right, the left would be crazy. What I want to ask you is, how can we break down the walls of left and right? Because I said this when Romney was running. If Romney gets in fact I just said it on Syria, I'll bet you he would have been saying the same thing about Syria. The exact same thing about Syria. And I'll bet you that at least 30% of the Republicans, if not more, would have all stood up and said, yeah, he's right.
Well, I use a little bit different language, and I'll see if you think it's worthwhile. First thing is I get tired of conservative, liberal, right and left, Republican and Democrat, because it's all a mixed bag.
Yep.
So when people ask me, well, what word would you use? I like the word non-intervention and versus those who like to intervene. So I want to be a non-interventionist on our personal lives and how we raise our kids. We don't want the government to tell us. But I don't want intervention in the economy, so I become a free market economist. And then I also follow the founders' admonition that we shouldn't be involved in the internal affairs of other nations. So I'm a non-interventionist. And all of a sudden you pick up support from the left and you pick up support from the right, but it comes together as a consistent philosophy that the individual is important, and none of us are considered important, nor should we be penalized because we belong to a certain group.
Correct.
You say everybody is an individual, and we don't have, and that means you have responsibility for oneself. And if you mess up, you can't go to the government to be bailed out. So those are the words I use, and I think it tells us pretty clear, and if you use another word for intervention, authoritarian. They want to use force and compulsion, and yet I think conservatives and liberals come up short in each area. So one, short on economics. We got to tell you what to do, or you won't take care of yourself. Others, if you have all these choices you might make bad choices. Yeah, but what if the government makes bad choices for us? Then we all suffer the consequences. So yes, freedom does mean you have a chance that you might make bad choices, but you can't eliminate that. But you can minimize it by keeping the bad guys out of government.
Let me just change subject just for a second here, because we're kind of here. I've been having this argument that people say I'm a conservative, and I want to say I'm a libertarian, but I'm not. I'm not Penn Jillette. I'm a conservative and I'm a religious guy, but I don't want to shove my religion down anybody's throat. And so I've been saying that I think there's a lot of liberals. I can live next to a liberal if they're a libertarian liberal. I don't think it's enough to say I'm a liberal or I'm a conservative. I think you need to say I'm a small government or a non-authoritarian conservative or liberal. Because it's only the problem really is, can religious people get along with libertarians and find a coalition? And can libertarians get along with religious people and find a coalition?
Matter of fact, yes, I obviously I believe that strongly, because I use that as the example when I'm talking to the college kids, and I, go to the college campuses and I get good receptions. And when I start talking about social values and people's personal lifestyles and all, I use the religious issue as one to demonstrate it, because we're pretty good on religion. We don't force our religion on people. We're tolerant of people who have different religions in this country, and we tolerate atheists. We usually don't even ask people what's going on. But when it comes to other social things, which are vices for many of us, a lot of people can't tolerate that. So the biggest problem, I think, is this idea that if you allow people to make their own choices, that some of the people aren't very tolerant. Well, they're doing things that I don't personally like, but where you draw the line, of course, is the don't hurt anybody. If you hurt yourself, we can't protect you against yourself.
It neither breaks my leg nor picks my pocket.
Yeah.
What difference does it make? Thomas Jefferson.
That's it.
Yeah.
And but liberal do-gooders, the interventionists, think that, oh no, we can't trust the people with that much responsibility. I've had members of Congress sit and tell me, as we were voting for some of this intervention to protect the people, I said, why are you doing this? I mean, why do we have to tell them? They literally said, the person said, they're too stupid. And that's what they're operating on, that people are too stupid and they are so smart, and that's why they have to have a core curriculum,
right.
And that's why they have to tell you how big your soda drink has to be, right. The whole mess.
Okay, so then let's go and take a quick break, and then we're going to come back to that. Because people are really pretty, they're not stupid, they're living in self-imposed ignorance. And I did it for most of my life. You can find the answers. But if you don't start to look for the answers, if you don't start reading history, if you don't start educating yourself and your family, you become a slave. And that's what the system is churning out now. A bunch of people who are willing just to go, well, yeah, I'm going to follow him because he told me to.
But there's competition today.
Yes,
and
there
you're
is.
Part of it.
Okay, back in just a second. Ron Paul has a solution to our problems. It's called the school revolution, and it requires you to actually get engaged. It requires you to not pass the problem on to another generation or to another person or have a government agency solve it. With maximum liberty, maximum personal responsibility is required. So he's written a book, and he also has a website for curriculum for homeschooling, and you can find it at ronpaulcurriculum.com. Let's see. Nobody knows how our government works. Nobody knows the Constitution. You ask people who, name the two houses of government, name the three branches of government, they can't do it. if we let one more generation go, if this generation, my generation has kids now, if we let this generation go without really instilling these values, will we get freedom back?
No, we won't. But I see progress being made. A lot of people worry about how are we ever going to get the masses, 51%, all of a sudden to agree with what we want. And I don't work under that assumption. It's just the people who are in leadership positions, the people who teach, the people who write, the people who get involved in philosophy, and that's where we're making progress. I mean, we talk about homeschooling and the importance of it. I remember I was out of Congress for 12 years. I went back in '96 after having gone back to my medical practice, and I remember going in the middle of the week to having a little meeting with local community people, and some kids would show up. I'm like, what are these kids doing here? And here, obviously, it didn't take me long to figure out, well, it was the parents with their homeschooling kids. And I thought, well, these homeschool kids, they're going to be social misfits.
Yeah.
And they turned out to be so sophisticated and stand on their feet and ask good questions, nothing like what you see in the public school system. And the people I'm running into now that are energized on these issues and concerned about the future at the college level, I'm seeing the same kind. But it's not everybody. It's the people who are thinking about it. So I'm very encouraged about what's happening outside of Washington. I'm very encouraged what's happening on the internet. People are getting new information, and
the internet should put school out of business. I mean, do you know David Glertner from Yale?
Who?
David Glertner, professor at Yale.
I just know his name.
Okay, yeah, he's brilliant, and he's on the same page that we can revolutionize everything. He said to me, Glenn, who's the best teacher on D-Day? Who's the biggest expert on D-Day? And I said, I don't know. He said, neither do I. But the internet could find him, and the free market would sort it out. He said it might be a cab driver in San Diego, and he knows D-Day inside and out because it's his passion.
Yeah.
And he said, if you find them, you can find them by putting out a blanket and just searching, and then the best, most passionate teachers will just all bubble to the surface, through the internet.
And I've seen such a transition because I was in high school and college in the 50s. I got fascinated in college and medical school with doing things other than just medicine. I was very curious. This didn't all add up, right? But then I went searching, and I'd find a book here and a book there. Came across Bastiat and Mises and Hayek and Road to Serfdom, which I know you're familiar with. And that led one thing to another, led me to the Foundation for Economic Education. It took me a long time. It took me a while. There was no Amazon, and there was no internet.
Right.
And you go to a bookstore, and they, we might be able to order this for you. But the Fee Foundation was able to get me the books, and I'd visit there. Now it's the click.
I know.
One click, and you can, one-click purchase.
I know.
You can get the book. The libertarians at one time predicted, the internet will do away with books, but instead it just made it bigger.
Right.
You get information on the internet.
Right.
You don't have to buy. Matter of fact, our plan here is to not require people to buy books, for the homeschooling. But now I've ended up buying more books.
Oh, I bought double the amount of books.
So,
They're just
because
electronic.
I like books.
Yeah.
I like books. Some people can handle the internet and just read from a computer, but I like the books, and I like to mark it up. It looks like you do too. This is much better. But it is so available, and I know some of the college kids deserve a bun wrap, and they get it. But I tell you what, there's a nice nucleus of people there that are really, really clean-cut, healthy kids.
I think the university. I think the universities are teeming with people who know they've been sold a pack of lies, who know they're being ripped off because they're not really getting an education, who know that the trophy that they won all the way through school for merit wasn't for merit at all. They know that's all. They know that they don't know, and they know that they're being ripped off and not being prepared for the future. I think there's tremendous potential there because They're smart. They're smart enough to know what they don't know. Does that make sense?
Yep, absolutely. And I'm amazed at what happened in the last 5 years. I never would have predicted, because it was an item that I've been interested in a long time, and that's monetary policy in the Federal Reserve. Yeah. And transition of the last 5 years, I could not believe it. The largest crowd I ever got on a college campus was at Berkeley, and they loudly cheered my critique of the Federal Reserve. Now, there's something strange going on when that can happen.
You know what it is? And I have to take a break, and let's come back to that, because it's the Federal Reserve, but it's also the two-party system. There is an opportunity I don't think anyone has seen for maybe at least 100 years, maybe since 1850, of the Republican Party just imploding and becoming the Whig Party, because at least a lot of Republicans, and I think a lot of Democrats, not forget the parties, a lot of people on differing sides of issues know this is BS. We're watching a kabuki theater. We're watching a puppet show. And it's all pre-written and all planned, and they do whatever it is they do. And I want to talk to you about the Fed and the possibility of a third party and what you sense coming in just a second.
Hi, I just changed my makeup. Do I look different? Actually, Glenn, as you may know from the radio program today, is expecting his first grandchild today. And in the commercial break, he got the call. Immediately get to the hospital. So I was telling her, Dr. Paul's here. We could just brought her here.
I told him that I should go and he should stay here. I'll go over and help out.
Yeah, what's he going to do? He's going to do nothing. Right. So we have a few more minutes left with Dr. Paul, and I appreciate you hanging out with me. Glenn was kind of, before the break, kind of leaning towards a conversation about third parties, and this is one obviously you're very familiar with. You ran for president, the Libertarian Party. And you did eventually switch to the Republican Party. Is it a sense, because I think Glenn's, he's flirting with this idea. He's given up on the Republicans completely. Your son is one of the very few that he actually respects in Washington. And it feels like we can't ever get anywhere. So he's flirting with this idea with third parties. You've had quite an experience. If you're talking to a Glenn Beck about that idea, what do you tell him?
Well, I understand the frustration, because there's a lot of that, and I get the question a whole lot. What about time for a third party? And I say it's time for a second party, because we just have one party there. They're the same on all the big issues. They agree. Just recently, we had a vote on in Washington on Syria. And Pelosi and Boehner both supported the bombing of Syria. They both support the Fed. They both work together on the big issues. They fight and argue over power and things, but it was a bipartisan thing that went, with leadership to, pass that horrible budget resolution just recently, the continuing resolution. No, the frustration level is real high. There's some reasons why I'm not too optimistic about it, because, we send our armies over to the Middle East and around the world to spread democracy. Of course, I don't like that word as well as I like a free society and a few other things in a republic. But we send our troops over there and people die and say, you have elections and do this. And they have elections, then we don't like who gets elected, and then we throw them out and put our dictator in. So we're total hypocrites when it comes to it. But here at home, there's no democracy at home. You have a one-party system. There's two parts of it, Republicans and Democrats. They exclude, any alternative party. You can't get in debates. It's hard to get on the ballots. So it's very frustrating. So I think more in terms of the intellectual climate that will change the ideas of both parties. Now, when it came to the bombing in Syria, Obama had to quit. Why? Because the people rebelled. Republicans and Democrats and independents said, no, we don't need another war. And that is what I think happens. In the early 1970s, Nixon, when he closed the gold window and got us all the gold standard, he says, we're all Keynesians now. Well, he was right. The Democrats were Keynesians, Republicans were Keynesians, but ideas have to infiltrate the whole culture, and whether you have to get Republicans and Democrats and independents to agree we don't need the Federal Reserve fixing interest rates. So yes, the reforms may come in another party someday, but not soon. There's too much bias. I think the crisis is going to come much sooner, and it's going to hit. The race is, can we convert enough people to believing, and understanding free market economics and why liberty is the issue and why balanced budgets are important. That is the race, because the collapse is coming. Then the question is what are we going to rebuild it with? Are we going to allow the authoritarians who destroyed our system to rebuild it and put it into another one and have another dictatorship of sorts? Or are we going to reform, refine, and do even a better job than the founders did and work in the direction of personal liberty? And that, of course, is the side that I'm on, and I tend to be optimistic that a lot of people are joining us in this effort.
Yeah, I don't often quote Howard Dean, but he once said, and fairly recently, something to the effect of, it's no longer a battle between capitalism and socialists, it's how socialist are we? And people beat up on him about that, but in effect, it's true. The food stamp program was going to be renewed. The Democrats came out and they wanted a 65% increase in the food stamp program. And then the Republicans, the other opposition party, wanted crazy, crazy cuts. They only wanted to increase the program by 57%.
Yeah.
And it's like, if those are your two options, there's not an option of anyone actually cutting it or changing the program to make it more efficient, or ideally, eventually getting to the point where we eliminate it. These entitlements are things that we eventually want to get to the point where no one needs them at all. That's the idea, right? And if it's going to be provided, it's going to be provided by the private sector.
That's right, but right now they don't see it that way, and they talk about the socialism is coming, and there's different forms of socialism. You have a fascist Nazi type of socialism, National Socialism versus communism type, and the one thing that is happening today that I happen to get along very well with Ralph Nader. Ralph Nader's a progressive, but he's civil libertarian, doesn't like the wars, and doesn't like the Fed. And he likes me because when I attack what's going on, I talk about corporatism. The corporations or anything, but those of us who believe in free enterprise and free markets and capitalism, they blame this corporatism for all its fault, protecting Wall Street and the military-industrial complex. They say, see, it doesn't work. It That has nothing to do with freedom.
Yeah.
But it's corporatism, which Mises, the great Austrian economist, said corporatism will lead us to fascist type of a type of government. And look at it. Did Obama, exclude the drug company and the insurance companies from he protects them.
Very happy with this.
They're happy with it. It's big money, big corporations, and if the intellectual battle we have is making sure that freedom and free markets and property rights don't get blamed for the crisis we have, and say, see, you guys had it, and look at how it's failed.
Yeah, we'll come back and maybe talk a little bit about this, because Michael Moore did a movie called Taking on Capitalism, and he used as an example the way the government works with companies. And that is not capitalism at all. It has nothing to do with capitalism. We have to figure out a way to communicate that. And you're, of course, the best at this. We'll come back in a second here on the Glenn Beck program. It's Stu in for Glenn. He is on his way to meet his first grandchild. So we will hear more about that, of course, on the program. Finishing up with Dr. Ron Paul. The book is The School Revolution. You can get it in stores. We kind of left off at the break talking about capitalism. And I kind of have this idea that this generation should understand capitalism better than any other, because at some degree it was sort of an academic exercise until you have this opportunity with the internet. Internet is a place where I think everybody knows, hey, I can go on the internet, I can find the best prices, I can find any variety of anything. Systems work better, feedback puts the best people on top and puts the people who aren't doing quality work down below. That's the free market at work. But it doesn't seem like this generation is latching onto that, or latching onto the principles of capitalism as well as I would have at least had hoped.
Well, they know how to make purchases on the internet, and when they realize that they pay less taxes on the internet, they like that too, because now they're trying to collect more sales taxes on the internet. The one problem is the word capitalism was created by the communists to be a pejorative and a nasty thing. Oh, dirty capitalism. Capitalism is bad. And even though some think we should reform and teach and say capitalism is something good, I don't have the energy to do that. So I don't use that word as much. I use free markets because the ism was meant to be negative. It's sort of like when you get into isolationism. It sounds horrible, but I say I'm a non-interventionist. I don't want to isolate myself at all. So using words are very important. But I think the free market is something that we do have to win the fight on. Eventually we have to. I think it's just a little easier when you use free markets and make sure people identify corporatism, and they can't ever relate corporatism and free markets the same, and make them think corporatism and corporatism and free markets are quite a bit different.
I have this thing on my weekend show where I have I call it the hot girl monologue, where we have an attractive female just talking about capitalism or talking about freedom of the Second Amendment, because I feel like sometimes it's just the packaging. You've been able to overcome. I mean, here you are, a guy relating to people under 20, probably better than any politician, with the possible exception of Barack Obama on the other side. And you've been able to do that in a way that no one else seems to be latching onto or been able to replicate. How is that?
I've been trying to figure it out myself. I'm glad I've been able to do it. And 5 years ago, it wasn't happening. I would go to a college campus, say the same thing, but the enthusiasm wasn't there. I noticed a big difference in the 2008 campaign and the crisis that was hit. And the debates were such, and a lot of college kids, when I ask them why are you interested, they says, well, it sounds like you're the one told them the truth. So, but I think it was the collapse that made people think there is something wrong, and they figured I was giving them a straight story. And you can't fool young people as much as you can fool the businessman who's dependent on the government. He's 40, 50, 60 years old. He's lived with this. He knows the ropes. He knows how to get around things, and they're not much interested in looking at this with an open mind. And young people are, and they're more attuned to the internet, and so that makes me more optimistic, that they do. But personal liberty is appealing. I think it's appealing to all of us. I think, somebody was sort of making fun of me on the internet because I said I was born as a libertarian, because I think we are. Just think of the little kids, very independent minded. And we were talking about homeschooling. That's all squelched by the public school system. People want to be self-starters and energetic and learn on their own and ask questions and things. But the same way with teenagers are pretty independent minded too. And I think that I made people feel good about it, like there wasn't anything wrong by having an independent mind, an independent spirit. But I really emphasize, and they don't seem to be offended by that, you have to assume responsibility. If you want your life and you want to keep the money you earn, and you can have your own lifestyle, if you mess up, you just can't depend on somebody else. And you have to be non-aggressive. You can't have aggress against anybody else. And you have to be tolerant of people even if you disagree with their lifestyles. And you put that together, and people say, that makes sense. And therefore the crowds that I would get at the colleges were very diverse. They were just different, because everybody uses freedom in a different way. We do it in religion. We have different religion, but we're not as tolerant as people who have different social lifestyles. People, oh no, he does this, and we don't approve of that kind of stuff. And
I'm very much with you. I want the government out of my heterosexual marriage. At this point, I want them out of all of it. I want
government out of marriage, altogether.
All out of the entire business. The book is called The School Revolution by Dr. Ron Paul. And man, it's interesting, because I think it's something that a lot of people don't consider. I feel like I don't know if I'd be able to homeschool myself, for my kids, because it just seems difficult. I don't know that I feel like it's something I've always been brought up to. You're not a teacher; you have to be qualified for that, but you can do it yourself. Dr. Paul, thank you very much for being on the program.
You're welcome. Nice to be here.
We'll see you tomorrow.